house has been at the end of Thompson Road as long as anyone could remember, yet there's no one still alive who remembers anyone ever living in it. It was a remnant of an era when the Victorian-style architecture was still prevalent, yet it had been left in disrepair. Windows boarded over, paint fallen off, shingles missing here and there. Most people in the town declared there was something not quite right with the old building. Some rumors stated that of the few people who tried to move and left promptly afterwards seeking other residence. I remember when I was a young boy there was an older gentleman who would care to the grounds, cutting the grass, and making small mendings to the surrounding fence. He was a kindly old man who wore a corduroy jacket and a flat cap. He almost had the appearance of a man from a different time and place. Most children avoided walking by Thompson Road on their way home from school, yet the old house had a curious draw to me back then, and I often liked to stare at it in the dying light of the autumn days. It was in these days I became acquainted with the old caretaker, who told me his name happened to be Mr. Thompson. Just like the road, most of the town children had seen Mr. Thompson tending to the old house, and naturally, as is the pastime of children, created stories and rumors about him. Many said he lived in the house waiting to trap any poor soul foolish to wander on the property by locking them in the cellar. Others said he was an escaped prisoner using the old place as a hideaway from the police. I didn't believe the rumors going around about him for a second, but the house drew my curiosity. Nonetheless, my acquaintance with Mr. Thompson began with my troublesome self committing the act of trespassing. My act of mischief had been inspired by one of the playground stories I had heard earlier that day from one of my classmates. He said that he had skulked about the property peering into cracks along the boarded up windows. He told me and several other kids how it looked as if someone was still living there, and the peculiar fact that no pictures hung in the place save for one wall in the living room. Given I had taken an interest to the old place, I naturally decided that day to see for myself. I climbed the fence that afternoon in October and had skulked ever so closely to the first window I saw. As I peered inside, I was shocked to notice that the interior looked very much like someone had been in fact living there. Furniture and decor, the Victorian style still so present, was set like the previous residents had just left and would return any minute. I decided that the room I was peering into be the living room due to the fact when I looked across to the far edge, I found the wall mentioned on the playground. It was filled top to bottom with what appeared to be every picture in the house, the wall behind barely visible due to the number of picture frames. From where I was standing, I could not make out what was in any of the pictures. It was at this time I was discovered upon by Mr. Thompson. No doubt he took me for some troublemaking youth looking for a place to plant graffiti. Yet when I answered his initial question to what I was doing there, he began to soften, realizing I was merely a curious wanderer exploring what appeared to be the forbidden. This began my friendship with the old gentleman, who I could tell was not a criminal or madman seeking to lock people in his cellar. He let me go and promised not to tell anyone I was trespassing on private property if I promised him to continue to visit and talk to him as he worked. We struck a deal, and I made it a purpose to continue my visitings to the old house after school to talk with Mr. Thompson. I never saw anyone else spend much time around the place other than him, and asked him if he lived in or in fact owned the old Victorian house, which I never saw him enter or come out of. He told me no, and laughed dryly. His family, he said, had always taken care of the old place as long as he could remember. He told me stories of people trying to enter seeking something they could not find, and of seeing strange things within the house, though things he would not or could not describe to me. He told me on one night of the year weird things would happen within the old building. Things not natural, was how he put it. I tried to pry out of him what exactly he meant. I have to show you, he said. It cannot be described. He told me in exactly 1 week he would find me and show me exactly what possessed the old house. Exactly 1 week to the day was November 1st. I was shocked that a day where the unexplained could happen would be a day after Halloween. Nevertheless, Mr. Thompson found my house, how I am still unsure, and awoke me with a soft knock on my window. "Hurry, we'll be late," he said in a hushed tone. "For what?" was my reply. "The answer to your question," was all he answered. As I dressed quickly, we walked along the dark streets of the town from one light post to the next, which dimly illuminated the street. We came to Thompson Road and turned down it. It was dark. No street lamps traveled down the lonely lane. As we approached the old house, it cast a dark shadow upon us in the low moonlight. Mr. Thompson easily glided past the rusted iron gate and up the rickety steps like a wraith. I followed him as fast as my short legs could follow him in the darkness. From his coat pocket he removed a small ring with 2 rusted keys. One of these he inserted into the door lock. I could hear the old tumblers moving and click as he twisted the lock open. As I followed him into the entryway, I was met by a strong musty smell due to many years of no ventilation. They walked further into the house. I was surprised that Mr. Thompson hadn't brought a flashlight with us, though he moved through the hallways and rooms as if he knew his way from pure memory. I took keen notice as we walked that there remained no pictures or even fade marks of pictures once hanging on any of the walls. They walked down a long hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath us. As we came closer to the door at the end, I perceived that a soft glow was emanating from around the doorframe. Mr. Thompson stopped at this point and spoke his first words to me since we entered the house. What we are about to see might cause you to startle. The important thing is that you just observe and disturb nothing. I took his warning to heart and made a promise that no matter what I saw I would be as quiet as a church mouse. He reached out his hand and quietly opened the door. What lay behind I would never have imagined. It was the living room, or a parlor as it would have been referred to over a century ago. The one I no doubt had seen from my peering through the window panes. Within, to my surprise, however, were people. I saw what appeared to be a party of 20 people, or more, dressed as if in a masquerade party straight out of Victorian England. I almost opened my mouth to speak had it not been for Mr. Thompson's calloused hand stifling my mouth from uttering a peep. I stared at the scene in front of me and noticed that the people here didn't seem right. For some reason they all had a blank look in their eyes, like they were sleepwalking or drugged. They walked about not making a noise. Several couples were dancing a silent waltz with no expression on their faces. In everything they did they took no notice of us. My attention was immediately caught by the wall of pictures on the opposite side of the room. I made my way quietly over to it, being careful to not disturb anything in my path. As I approached the wall, I anticipated seeing pictures of everyone who had either lived in the house and possibly relations to the past residents. What I did not expect to see, in fact, was empty pictures. Most of the pictures were of either empty rooms or nature. I scanned the wall more closely and to my horror found pictures with people in them. What I was not expecting to see was the people in these pictures to turn and look at me. It took all my control to not cry out or faint at what I saw. I rubbed my eyes thinking they still had sleep in them. When I reopened them, the people in the pictures were still moving and looking at me. They were not dressed in Victorian garb. Many wore the dress of more recent decades. The looks in their faces were as they were haunted with fear. It was as if they were trapped in the picture frames, the frames their prison cells. I didn't notice Mr. Thompson walk up behind me. I saw him begin to stare at a particular picture. There was a young lady in it. When she saw him, she began to peer at him intently, pressing her hands against the glass as if trying to get out, looking at him longingly. It was in this brief moment that he forgot his own role and touched the picture frame, pressing his hand against her tiny one. The moment he did so, everyone in the parlor stopped in his or her tracks, looking at him. Looking at us, it felt. I had never felt my blood go cold as it did that night or ever since. How long they stared at us I do not know, only that eventually they began to slowly walk their way toward us. "Run," was all he could whisper to me as we tried to escape. They ran to the other end of the room, yet the people in the room managed to pass through the furniture like ghosts to get to us. They left me alone, as I had made no disturbance, yet they grabbed Mr. Thompson and dragged him to the wall. With his loose hand he dug in his pocket and threw me his rusty keys. "Look in the shed," was all he could get out as the now ghost-like beings dragged him toward his end. The first ones to reach the wall turned almost into a vapor and dissipated before forming into a frame, unmoving, looking as if they belonged. I turned and ran down the hallway as I began to see Mr. Thompson to dissipate at the hands of his captors. What remained of his scream I heard as I fled the house, running for what I believed to be my life. The following day I awoke in my bed, the memory of the night before feeling like a nightmare. But was it true? I had to know. I ate a quick breakfast and walked down Thompson Road towards the house. When I reached it, it was quiet. The wind stirred, blowing leaves all over the lawn, but Mr. Thompson was nowhere in sight. I stuck my hands in my pockets, discovering the rusty key from my memory. Realizing I had not dreamed it entirely, I made my way to the shed, as I vaguely remembered his final words telling me to look before I fled. Inside the shed were tools and garden supplies typical of a gardener's shed. On top of one of the barrels was a small leather book. Engraved on the cover was JT, no doubt his initials. This was no doubt what he asked me to find. I dared not enter the house again, and instead grabbed a pry bar and small flashlight from the shed. Ripping off the boards from the parlor window, I managed to open the window a bit and stuck my flashlight in and look around. Everything looked the same, as if nothing had happened the night before, with the exception of when my flashlight hit the wall of pictures. I saw Mr. Thompson looking back at me hauntingly. I ran back home and threw the book and keys in my dresser. To this day, I still haven't looked at them. I'm not sure I do.